I never expected a simple glance to change everything. But the way my friend's mom looked at me, calm, knowing, almost daring, made it impossible to forget. And then one evening, with a slow smile, she said words that still echo in my chest. "You keep looking at me that way, sooner or later, I won't be able to resist pulling you closer." I never thought much about the small details of life. How someone sets a cup on the table, or how a smile lingers in the corner of their lips, until I started noticing her. My friend's mom had always been there in the background. Graceful, composed, the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. But that evening, for some reason, she felt impossible to ignore. It was a Saturday. I had come over to work on a project with my friend, but he had gone upstairs to grab a book, leaving me alone at the dining table. She appeared from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea, her steps unhurried, her posture effortlessly straight. She placed 1 cup before me, and for a moment her fingers brushed against mine on the porcelain handle. It was such a small contact, barely there, really, but it sent a surprising warmth through me, a spark that stayed even after she moved away. "Thank you," I managed, my voice softer than usual. Her eyes met mine then, dark, calm, and curious. She smiled, not in a way that rushed or forced itself, but slow, almost deliberate, as if she knew something I didn't. That smile held me still. My heart gave a little jolt, and I found myself wondering if I had been staring too long. She sat down across from me, her hands resting gently on the table. "You come here so often," she said lightly, her voice carrying both humor and warmth. "It feels like you're part of the family already." I laughed, trying to appear casual, though inside I felt anything but. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," she replied simply, her gaze steady. The air between us seemed different. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just a guest in her home, noticing ordinary things too closely. But every small detail tugged at me. The way the light from the window touched her hair, the elegance in how she folded her hands, the softness of her tone when she asked about my studies. I answered, stumbling a little, more focused on her presence than my own words. And though she nodded, encouraging me to continue, I sensed something deeper in her attention. She wasn't just listening to be polite. She was truly seeing me. That realization made my chest tighten. Then my friend's footsteps echoed from upstairs. Just like that, the spell loosened. She leaned back slightly, a polite distance returning. But as my friend entered the room, she gave me one more glance, a subtle flicker of her eyes, a faint curve at her lips. It was fleeting, but it was enough to leave me wondering if I had imagined the entire thing, or if she had felt it too. I carried that question with me for the rest of the day. It happened more than once. My friend would leave the room for a few minutes, maybe to take a call or run upstairs to grab something, and I would find myself alone with her again. At first, I told myself it was nothing unusual, but each time it happened, I noticed how quickly the silence between us turned into something else, something almost comfortable, almost dangerous. That evening, she walked into the living room where I was waiting. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling gracefully along her cheek. She carried a small tray with a plate of fruit and set it on the table in front of me. "You must be hungry," she said softly. I smiled. "You always think ahead." Her laugh was light, genuine. She sat down on the arm of the sofa, close enough that I caught the faintest trace of her perfume. It wasn't strong or overwhelming, just warm, like vanilla blended with something floral. It made me want to breathe in deeper, though I forced myself to remain still. We started talking about simple things at first: university, work, the stress of trying to figure out what comes next in life. She asked questions no one else usually bothered to ask, not just what I was studying, but why and whether it made me feel fulfilled. Her eyes didn't wander while I spoke. She looked directly at me, listening with a depth that made my words feel more important than they were. I found myself telling her things I rarely voiced out loud. How uncertain I felt about the future. How sometimes it seemed like I was pretending to have everything together. She didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, her expression soft. Her lips pressed into a thoughtful line as though my worries mattered to her. At one point, she reached over to brush a thread from my shoulder. The gesture was small, innocent, yet it sent an undeniable shiver through me. Her fingertips lingered half a second longer than necessary before she withdrew her hand. I caught the movement in slow motion, the way she smiled faintly, almost apologetically, as though she had noticed it too. I tried to steady my voice. You always make things sound less overwhelming. That's because you make them sound honest, she replied gently. Most people are afraid to be that way. Her words sank into me, heavier than I expected. And the way she said them, low, calm, with the slightest tilt of her head, made me feel like she was looking past my age, past the surface, straight into who I really was. The front door creaked just then, and we both straightened instinctively. My friend's footsteps filled the hallway, and in an instant, the atmosphere shifted back to ordinary. But I couldn't unfeel the closeness, the way her voice had reached me. Later that night, as I lay in bed replaying the day, it wasn't the project or even my friend that filled my mind. It was her quiet questions, her subtle smile, and the way a single touch could linger far longer than it should have. It was late in the afternoon, sunlight spilling through the curtains in soft golden streaks. My friend had stepped outside to take a call, leaving me and her alone again in the quiet living room. I told myself not to overthink it, that these moments meant nothing, but my heart seemed to have its own opinion, pounding just a little harder every time she was near. She sat beside me on the couch, not directly close, but close enough that I could feel the dip of the cushion shift with her weight. She tucked one leg under the other and rested her elbow on the armrest, turning slightly toward me. The faint rhythm of her bracelets clinking against her wrist filled the silence before she spoke. "You know," she said, her voice low, "you remind me of someone I knew when I was younger, always lost in thought, like there's a whole world going on inside your head." I laughed softly, trying to cover how her words struck me. "Is that a good thing?" Her smile was slow, deliberate. "It can be, if you're brave enough to share it." Something in the way she said it made me forget my surroundings for a moment. My eyes lingered on her face longer than I intended, the graceful curve of her jaw, the faint line at the corner of her mouth when she smiled, the calm strength in her gaze. And then, before I could stop myself, my knee shifted just slightly, brushing against hers. The touch was so small, so accidental, yet it felt enormous. I froze, expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. She stayed perfectly still, her leg warm against mine, as if she had noticed and silently allowed it. I felt the air thicken around us. My throat tightened, and for a second I couldn't think of a single word to say. Then she tilted her head and looked at me, really looked, her eyes holding mine without hesitation. It was the kind of gaze that made time slow down, the kind that asked questions without needing to speak them aloud. "I can see you thinking again," she teased softly, but her voice carried a different weight now. I smiled faintly, trying to steady myself. "Maybe I'm just noticing things." Her lips curved in a way that was almost knowing. And then, as if to test me, she reached for the remote on the coffee table. Her hand moved across the space between us, and for a brief second, her fingers brushed the back of my hand. It wasn't deliberate, or maybe it was, but it set every nerve in my skin alight. Neither of us acknowledged it. She picked up the remote casually, pressing a button without even glancing at the screen. But the silence that followed was no longer casual. It was charged, heavy with all the words neither of us dared to say. When my friend returned a few minutes later, the space between us looked unchanged. But inside me, everything had shifted. I couldn't shake the warmth of her touch, the way her eyes had lingered, the quiet electricity that seemed to hum between us now. And for the first time, I began to wonder if she felt it too. It was one of those evenings where time seemed to slow down. My friend had gone out briefly, leaving me behind to finish a bit of work at the dining table. She was in the kitchen, moving quietly, until finally she came and sat across from me. No trays, no tea this time. Just her, settling into the chair as though she had something on her mind. I looked up from my notes, sensing the shift. Her expression was softer than usual, but there was a heaviness in her eyes, like she was carrying something she rarely let anyone see. "You work so hard," she said gently, her voice almost a whisper. But, do you ever feel tired of pretending you've got it all figured out? The question caught me off guard. For a second, I didn't know how to answer. And then I noticed the way her fingers were loosely interlaced on the table, her thumb tracing small, distracted circles across her palm. She wasn't just asking about me. She was speaking about herself too. I closed my notebook slowly. All the time, I admitted. Sometimes I feel like I'm just guessing at life, hoping no one notices I'm lost. Her lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. She leaned back, exhaling as though she had been holding that breath for too long. It's strange, isn't it? You get older, people think you're steady, unshakable. But inside, sometimes you just feel invisible. The honesty in her words pulled at me. I had never heard her speak like this before. She wasn't the poised, graceful woman who moved effortlessly around her home. She was simply human, vulnerable, quietly longing to be understood. Without thinking, I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly over hers. Her skin was warm, soft, trembling just faintly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a breath that seemed to ease something inside her. Her eyes met mine, glistening in the dim light. "You're kind," she said softly. "Kinder than most people I've known in years." I didn't know what to say. Words felt too small, too clumsy. So I just stayed there, my hand covering hers, letting the silence hold us. And then, slowly, she rose from her chair and stepped around the table toward me. Before I could stand, she leaned down, her arms slipping gently around my shoulders. My breath caught as her cheek rested lightly against my chest. I froze for a moment, afraid to move, then slowly lifted my arms to hold her. The world outside seemed to vanish. The only sound was the faint rhythm of her breathing against me, uneven at first, then settling into calm. Her embrace wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was tender, grounding, as though she was letting herself rest in someone else's steadiness for the first time in a long while. When she finally pulled back, her hands lingered on my shoulders. She gave me a faint, fragile smile, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for listening." And just like that, the moment passed. But I knew something between us had quietly, irrevocably changed. The days that followed carried an unspoken change between us. Nothing had been said out loud, yet every glance, every pause, felt heavier than before. I told myself I was imagining it, that the hug had been nothing more than comfort, but the truth was impossible to ignore. One evening, I stayed later than usual. My friend had gone upstairs, claiming he'd be a while, and I found myself lingering in the living room. She was there too, sitting on the opposite end of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, her posture relaxed but her eyes quietly alert. We talked about little things at first. Music, a film she wanted to see, how quickly time seemed to be passing. But beneath her words, I sensed something else, a careful testing of boundaries. At one point, I caught myself looking at her too long. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her lips curved into that slow, deliberate smile I had come to know too well. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady on mine. "You keep looking at me that way?" she said softly, her tone light but laced with something deeper. She let the words hang in the air, watching my reaction before adding, "Sooner or later, I won't be able to resist pulling you closer." My breath caught, my chest tightening. She had spoken the very thing I had been afraid to admit, giving shape to the tension that had been building between us. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice wavered. "And what way is that?" She leaned back against the cushions, her eyes never leaving mine. "Like you see me, not just as someone's mother, not just as a host, but as a woman." Her honesty left me speechless. My pulse raced, my thoughts tangled in a storm of what-ifs. I wanted to deny it, to pretend her words hadn't pierced straight into the heart of what I felt. But there was no hiding now. She reached out casually, as though to emphasize her point, her hand brushing against my wrist. The contact was brief, but the warmth of her touch lingered long after she withdrew it. I swallowed hard, searching for words. "Maybe that's because you make it impossible not to notice." Her smile softened, almost wistful. She turned her gaze toward the window, as if to give me space, though her hand still rested close enough that I could feel its nearness. "Careful," she murmured, her voice low. "That kind of honesty can be dangerous." The room grew quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but full, thick with the weight of unsaid things. My heart was pounding, but I didn't move closer, didn't push. Instead, I let the silence speak for me, hoping she could feel what I couldn't yet say out loud. When my friend finally returned, the moment dissolved, leaving us both sitting as though nothing had happened. But inside me, I knew it had. We had crossed into new territory, half a confession, half a dare, and there was no way back from it. The evening had stretched later than usual. My friend had gone out to meet someone, leaving me behind with the excuse of finishing some notes for our project. In truth, I stayed because I wanted to, or maybe because I couldn't quite bring myself to leave her presence. She was in the living room, a soft lamp casting a golden glow around her. She wasn't dressed up, just a loose sweater and jeans. But something about the simplicity made her seem even more beautiful. She had tucked one leg beneath her, a book open in her hands, though her eyes weren't moving across the page. When I walked in, she glanced up and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't announce itself but quietly pulled you in. I sat down beside her, not too close, but closer than I normally would have dared. The silence felt different tonight, thicker somehow, like the air itself carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. For a while we talked softly about nothing important. The weather, the book in her hand, the way evenings seemed quieter than they used to. But beneath the words, our gazes kept colliding, holding a second too long before either of us looked away. At one point, she shifted, turning slightly toward me. The distance between us shrank to just inches. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. Her eyes lingered on mine, then dropped briefly to my lips before flicking back up. My chest tightened at the unspoken message in that glance. "If I let this happen," she whispered, so low it felt like it was meant only for herself, "everything changes." Her words struck me like a cord pulled too tight. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I didn't care about the consequences, that all I wanted was to be closer. But something inside me knew this wasn't a moment to rush. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, my voice soft, careful. "I know." Her breath trembled as she exhaled. She leaned in just slightly, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her breath against my cheek. My heart pounded, every nerve alive, waiting for her to close the last bit of distance. But then she stopped. Her hand lifted as if to reach for me, then hesitated midair, fingers curling back into her palm. She pulled in a deep breath, her eyes closing for a moment before she leaned back against the sofa. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable, yet strangely tender. We both knew what had nearly happened, and that knowledge lingered in the space between us like electricity refusing to fade. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but nothing felt right. So I simply stayed beside her, letting the quiet stretch, my hand resting on the cushion close to hers but not quite touching. And in that fragile, suspended moment, I realized something. Sometimes hesitation speaks louder than desire itself. The night felt unusually still, as though the house itself was holding its breath. My friend had already gone upstairs, leaving the two of us alone once again. I should have left too. I knew I should have. But something inside me kept me rooted in that living room, unable to walk away. She was seated at the edge of the sofa, her posture composed yet slightly fragile, like someone caught between decision and restraint. The lamplight framed her in a soft glow, and when she looked at me, her eyes carried the weight of everything we had left unsaid. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full, layered with all the glances, the touches, the hesitations that had led us here. My heart beat hard against my chest, not with impatience, but with the quiet certainty that something had to shift tonight. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, steady, though it trembled at the edges. I don't know where this would lead, and part of me is terrified of that. She paused, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her thumbs brushing against each other. But I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore. Her honesty made my breath catch. It was what I had wanted to hear, yet now that it was spoken, I realized how delicate the moment truly was. I moved closer, slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Instead, she looked at me with a softness I'll never forget. Vulnerable, hopeful, almost relieved. I don't want to make this harder for you, I said quietly, every word careful. But I feel it too. Every time I'm near you, it's there. She smiled then, faint and trembling, but real. And without another word, she reached for my hand. Her fingers slipped into mine, warm and gentle. Her grip tightening just enough to let me know she didn't want to let go. For a moment we just sat like that, our hands joined, our breaths sinking in the quiet. And then she leaned toward me, closing the small distance, resting her head lightly against my chest. The weight of her touch was grounding, steady. I wrapped an arm around her, holding her carefully, as though the moment might break if I moved too fast. I could feel her heartbeat through the fabric of her sweater. Rapid at first, then gradually slowing, settling into calm. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful, a promise without words. After a long while, she pulled back slightly, her hand still resting over mine. Her eyes glistened in the soft light. "Whatever happens," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." Her words settled deep inside me, carving a place I knew would never fade. And as I walked home later that night, the memory of her warmth, her voice, and the way she had finally let herself lean into me stayed with me. Quiet, powerful, and unforgettable. Speech Balloon, if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how you felt about their journey. And if you enjoy age gap slow burn romances like this one, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Red Heart.